Assessors must be able to plan an assessment. This lesson provides guidance to assessors about planning assessments. You will learn how to use the assessment plan, observation checklist and assessment procedure to prepare for an assessment and brief a candidate. Assessment is a quality assurance process, and in order to have quality at the end, we must have quality in the planning of the assessment. When planning assessments, the assessor must ensure the assessment is valid. That means the assessor must plan an assessment that accurately measures the job-critical knowledge, skills, and abilities required for proficient job performance. The questions to be considered by the assessor when planning the assessment should include: will the assessment be conducted under realistic working conditions that adequately assess the candidate's abilities to perform his or her duties on the job? Will the candidate be required to demonstrate the skills and knowledge that are identified in the assessment as critical to proficiency? Will the candidate be required to rely on his or her own skills and knowledge? Assessment is the process of collecting evidence and making judgments on whether competency has been achieved. The purpose of assessment is to confirm that an individual can perform to the standard expected in the workplace as expressed in the relevant industry competency standards. Information about the results of previous assessments should be consulted, if available, from the internal verifier. We mentioned an internal verifier, and we will meet him in more detail in the reviewing assessments lessons. But for now, allow us to introduce internal verification. This is the process whereby a training provider ensures it operates consistently and to national/regional standards in interpreting and assessing key skills. Internal verifiers are identified as the person responsible for monitoring the assessment process within the institution. The internal verifier is a stakeholder who is on your team, and it is another role for experienced assessors. More about in the reviewing assessments lessons. When you are planning a practical demonstration assessment, your main focus should be on observing the candidate. The second priority is to record evidence. So it follows that the assessment has to be planned for ease and speed of use. You want to plan an assessment that is easy to score and grade. Always plan assessments suitable for the level of the vocational qualification. The assessor should begin preparing for an assessment several days before it is scheduled. Begin by coordinating with the candidate to ensure that they are properly prepared and qualified to take part in the assessment. The assessment procedure can be used to specify candidate prerequisites for assessment, in terms of prior training, experience, and successful completion of other related assessments. The assessor should determine that a candidate is scheduled to be available for an adequate period of time to complete the assessment, which will range from an hour to days or weeks, depending upon the specific assessment procedures. The questions to be considered by the assessor from the design to planning stages of the assessment should include: what is the work activity? What does the work involve? What level of skill is needed? What are the conditions under which this work activity may be conducted? What generic work skills are needed? Where should the evidence of competence be gathered? What resources are needed to gather the evidence? How should the evidence be collected? Prior to conducting an assessment in an industrial area, check with management to determine when the required conditions might be present. Plan to schedule your assessment to match the availability of these conditions, if possible. When you have prepared a schedule, inform the candidate, the relevant supervisors, and other personnel of the date, time, and duration of the assessment so that they can plan their activities accordingly. These assessment conditions should be listed in the assessment procedures. The assessor and the candidate will be focused on observing, recording, and performing the tasks of the assessment and cannot exercise the normal amount of alertness, or even awareness, of situations developing, for example, behind them. Safety spotters should be appointed if required. Another preparatory activity is to check the equipment required for the assessment and ensure that it is operational and available. The assessment procedures should specify the equipment required to assess a particular proficiency. If an engineering assessment involves checking equipment status, make sure you know the normal range for each variable and record this information so that you can refer to it during the assessment. As part of your check of equipment, you should also review all applicable safety precautions and procedures to ensure full adherence to them. A general checklist for assessment preparation should include: gather and review all assessment materials. Verify that the candidate meets the assessment prerequisites. Check the candidate's duty schedule. Ensure that the appropriate conditions will be present for the assessment. Schedule the assessment and inform all affected personnel. Prepare the assessment areas. Prepare and arrange the necessary equipment and ensure that it is operational. Determine the necessary safety precautions. The pre-assessment briefing should take place at least 1 day prior to the assessment, even earlier if at all possible. This will help the assessor and the candidate to be well prepared for the assessment. Begin the briefing with a discussion of the candidate's prior experience, training, and qualifications. At this time, you should verify that this candidate is both qualified and willing to undertake the assessment. If you both agree the candidate is ready for the assessment, then continue with the assessment process. If not, arrange for additional training and set a date for another review of the candidate's qualifications. During the briefing, the assessor should provide the candidate with a copy of the assessment plan and the observation checklist. The assessment plans are instructions prepared especially for the candidate, focusing on the issues that will be of concern to that individual. The observation checklist summarizes the assessment objectives and all of the actions required for each objective. It is also the document on which you will record the candidate's final scores for each objective. Review the conditions or context of the assessment with the candidate. Specifically, discuss the different operational conditions under which the assessment will occur. You should also discuss the duration or period of the assessment. Some assessments can be completed in a single, relatively brief period of time, while other assessments require repeated observation, or taking advantage of specific conditions, if or when they occur. The conditions or context of the assessment is recorded on the assessment procedure. Safety is of paramount concern during the assessment. Because of this, you should remind the candidate that it is permissible to ask questions during the assessment. This can help to reduce the risk of an unsafe act during the course of the assessment. For all assessments, ensure that the candidate has the proper equipment to carry out the assessment. Inform the candidate that an assessment will be stopped at any time if the assessor judges that safety conditions are being violated for any reason. A general checklist for briefing the candidate should include: provide the candidate with copies of the assessment plan and observation checklist. Discuss the candidate's readiness for the assessment. Review the assessment plan with the candidate and answer any questions. Discuss the desired outcomes and consequences of failing to perform part or all of the assessment. Advise the candidate of the conditions and schedule of the assessment. Review the circumstances under which the assessment will be terminated due to safety concerns. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to prepare an assessment plan for your assessment and use it, for real, in your mock pre-assessment briefing with a candidate. You are reminded that you will be writing or recording a review of the mock assessment. If your plan does not serve its purpose effectively, record it as it happens and make improvements for the final. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to prepare an assessment procedure for your assessment and use it, for real, in your mock pre-assessment briefing with a candidate. You are reminded that you will be writing or recording a review of the mock assessment. If your plan does not serve its purpose effectively, record it as it happens and make improvements for the final. Refer to the student's manual for details on completing and submitting this project. You are required to prepare dimensions of competency for your assessment and use it, for real, in your mock pre-assessment briefing with a candidate. You are reminded that you will be writing or recording a review of the mock assessment. If your plan does not serve its purpose effectively, record it as it happens and make improvements for the final. Formative assessments are used to monitor student learning to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. More specifically, formative assessments help students identify their strengths and weaknesses, and targets areas that need work. There is no grade awarded.